And what I wanted to do with the remaining time is to take some of the ideas, and the one that actually had a hard time conceptualizing is getting an A in a math or a technical class, which is perfect because now you're on the flip side as a professor. So I'm actually going to read some of the things, and I was wondering if you could help me understand these things. I was a math major, but that doesn't mean I remember anything about being a math major at all. Okay, but the first thing that you say is so let's actually do something super simple that everyone can relate to because they may not be taking calculus or, you know, the stuff that you're doing computer science. But you mentioned the first thing is when you're taking notes, that the very first part of it is like the teacher is going to go through a very thorough explanation of how to do a particular note. A concept. And then it's really important to actually write down all of your notes when a teacher does that. And then after that, there's like a flurry of a whole bunch of problem sets that they'll go through to kind of, solidify the learning on that
Yeah.
particular concept. And what you recommend in the book is to make sure you take copious notes during like the main thing that they talk about. And then secondly, to try to write up the problem sets, but then taking the time after the class to follow up with the teacher to kind of shore up things. But now as a professor, would you still say these are the same rules that you would offer?
Yeah.
Okay.
Definitely for a technical class. What you're trying to do by technical I mean a class that you have technical problems as the main
Yeah.
activity. So like
Right.
math proofs or chemical equations, something like that. To me, your main activity in class is you're trying to capture the examples the professor gives and have enough information to actually understand how that example worked. So you're writing down the steps the professor did. When they added extra explanation, add that in. You can put an arrow in your notes, point to this step. This is why we did this here. And equally importantly, when you get to a step and you say, I don't really understand how the professor got there, but he's moved on already,
Right.
mark that very clearly. Big question mark, big circle, like this was a step I didn't understand. And in the book, I talk about this idea that you have a very small window after the lecture where your goal right away is to fill in those question marks.
Okay,
And
got
and
it.
I talk about there's different ways to do it. You can raise your hand during class right away and say, I didn't understand this step, go over it. You may only feel comfortable doing that a few times. You can then ask a professor right after class while people are leaving, can I ask you about this step? I didn't understand it. You fill in your details. You can then go to office hours to talk to the professor and TA. You can use the textbook. But the notion is that before you get to the next lecture for this class, you filled in all of those question marks.
Right.
So now you have captured in your notebook everything you need to understand those examples. You're not missing any of that information.
Right.
It doesn't mean you have it all learned yet. That's what the study process should be. But what you want to avoid is getting to the study process for the exam and realize that 30,
Uh-oh,
40% of
yeah.
the material that you've learned over the last 2.5 months, you haven't actually learned yet, and you have to learn it from scratch. You
Ah.
really want studying to be reviewing stuff you did at one point understand, and that you have written down all the material you need to recreate that understanding. So
Okay.
you want to come out of each lecture within the next day or two understanding all the examples from class. Now, you
Okay,
might
good.
forget it later, but you want to, at that point, to have understood it so that when it comes time to study, it really is a review, not learning.
Okay, got it. I get it. I get it. So, actually, before we got there, one of the things, well, so first is to take notes with the with the main problems and to follow up any questions that you have, and then to stay up and stay afterwards and or study hours or office hours. But it's really about getting those question marks answered. And then the thing I was like, what? What is he recommending? And you said something like, I remember being a math major and reading the chapter, diligently reading, we're going to be learning this concept and reading like the 30 or 40 pages and the examples. And then, going into the class and having them repeat every single thing that I just read. And what you recommended is actually go to class and then read the chapter. And I thought, wow,
Yeah,
that's smart.
yeah. Don't read your math textbook in advance. The math textbook is just another resource you can use to fill in those question marks from the examples given in lecture. That's the
Right.
way I see it. So
Yeah.
most of that textbook, you're not going to read.
Right. And so so you go through and you're like, I get this, then I guess why would you read the textbook? You wouldn't
Yeah.
have to read the textbook, right?
Because here's the secret: the professor is translating the textbook into lectures. So they've sort of already pulled out of the textbook. Here's what I want you to know. Here's the examples I think are important. So it's redundant in some
Right.
sense to say, well, let me read all that first, and then have the professor tell me, well, here's the things you actually need to know. It's redundant. It's better just to see what the professor thinks you need to know, try your hardest to understand everything, and where you couldn't get an answer answered in class, after class, in office hours, or talking to your classmates, you can also then go to your textbook and see if the examples there help clarify it. But math textbooks are a resource. They should not be seen like, say, a reading assignment in an English class or something like that.
Yeah, and that was huge to me. I'm like, I could have saved a lot of time by doing just that. Do you think that's also true? Because I didn't take I wasn't a STEM kind of person, so I didn't take any science classes. I mean, I probably took one. I don't remember what my Chem 11 class was like. But is that probably true of other classes, whether it's chemistry, math, computer science, the same rules apply?
Same thing, science, physics, chemistry, biology, calculus, discrete mathematics, probably any of these courses. Textbook is just another resource you have to help make sure that you understand what the professor lectured.
Right. Wow. I just think that was just, that for me was like, God, I wish, where was Cal when I needed him?
That's tons of hours saved right there.
Tons of hours, seriously. No, because I was telling my son, by the time you actually take, the 50 pages in math class and then the 50 pages in English and the 80 pages, like by the time you do that, you could just be reading pretty much all the time. If you try to read everything that they recommend, you would just be laden. You would be in the library for about 7 hours just reading. Okay, got it. So then the test prep. So all of this is in, the math classes to learn the materials, but then after there's the test, and you say in your book, hey, listen, let's be rational about this. Let's first distinguish what's a quiz versus a test. A quiz is something that if it's worth less than 15% of your final grade, it's a quiz. Otherwise, it's an exam. And so, if it's less than 15%, you could just kill yourself studying for that, but why? The question is that really the smart use of your time? Especially if you have other things that maybe you have a big paper that you're trying to study for and you have a quiz.
Yeah.
So how do you weigh those two? I think that was your point there.
Yeah, that's right. Don't kill yourself for something that's barely worth much of your grade,
right.
Because really quizzes, usually professors it's a checkpoint just to make sure that, you if there's a problem area, you learn about it before you get to the big exams.
Yeah. And I guess it's, as I understand math, it's additive. So if in a quiz you find out that you don't know a concept, if you keep on going without shoring up that area, you have an unsteady foundation. Is that the reason why they do that? And
so you can tell, I have an unsteady foundation because it might build on it. And even if you don't build on it, just so you can know before you get to the exams, and if it's a cumulative final, that I don't really understand this concept, let me shore it up now. Is to try to prevent you from getting to a midterm or getting to a final and trying to learn a math curriculum from scratch in 2 or 3 days. That's what leads to terrible grades in math courses.
Right. That's disastrous because you have this rocky foundation of which you didn't understand the first concept, of which a second, third, and fourth concept was built. Then you're screwed, basically.
And you're trying to learn it all from scratch the night before an exam. There's a reason.
Forget about it. Yeah. All right. But then you condition it by saying, unless your grade is in danger or if you're in academic trouble, then you got to focus on the quizzes. Why is that? Is that because everything counts at that point?
Yeah, I mean, I think the point with the quizzes is you do want to prepare for them, but you don't want to make it this sort of massive investment of time. Use it as a checkpoint, use it as a way to see, okay, I need to shore up this material or that material, because it's worth a small enough portion of your grade, for example, that, say, getting a B on a quiz, for example, that those points that you've lost there is like getting a small part wrong on one question on a midterm or a final. So it does need to be, they're important, but they need to be seen in proportion.
Okay, got it. Okay, now, so this is all, so that's about quizzes and tests generally, and then you talk about test prep for a math or a technical class, and you say the first step is that you actually want to go through your notes, label the date of the class. So I took September 30th, I did this particular set of things, and you want to write down the sample problems and answers as many as possible on a piece of paper. And I think the idea is this is going to help you come up with sample sets. Help me understand what this whole thing was about.
Yeah, I call it the mega problem set approach. You're basically taking, for every topic that is going to be covered on the midterm or final, and if you don't know what those topics are, the hint is you should be asking. You should have a list from the professor. here are the concepts you need to know how to do. And you want to have 1 or 2 sample problems for each of the concepts. And you get those sample problems from those careful lecture notes that you took in class, and you can also get them from the problem sets that have been assigned in class so far. So you want a good number of 1 or 2, maybe 3 sample problems for every concept you need to know that have very detailed solutions. And you want to write those down. You're basically writing a problem set for yourself that covers all the material you need to know for the big test and has detailed solutions for all the answers. That's going to be the foundation of the reviewing that's about to follow.
Okay, got it. So you actually write like you said, 2 or 3. Take each concept, 2 or 3 samples of that concept and very, very complete illustration solutions on how to do that. And then you write down the dates because if you need to have more details and you want to be able to kind of historically look back at your full notes.
Yeah, this is all about efficiency. So this is part of my ruthless efficiency. I don't want you to waste your time copying from scratch from your notebook the whole solution that you had already taken in your notebook. That's a waste of time. I'm always looking for steps that take up time but don't actually help you prepare better. So you can actually, in a lot of cases, you can say, let me just point to what page of my notebook has this really good sample solution. And then you've saved yourself the time of laboriously copying that sample solution onto a new piece of paper. So I want you to have this mega problem set, one thing you can hold that essentially has all the problems that you need to review, but I don't want you to have to recopy all the sample solutions. That wastes too much time. So I'm just saying, use pointers. Say, all right, the solution for this is in the sample solution that was given to us from problem set 4. The solution for this problem is in my notebook for May 14th. You can find it there. I'm saving time. So you have the sample solutions. You don't have to recopy them. So you have this mega problem set with all the problems you need to review. But the actual solutions to them, you might have to go then look at your index there.
Okay, so the problem set may be like, here's a problem set that I copied, and then the answer is in page 10 of the book.
Exactly, because answers are long, and I don't want you to waste time.
And it's already written someplace. Oh, got it. So it's like, here are 3 examples, some of which are in the class notes. Or actually, the answers may be in the class notes, but you actually take 3 samples of each. And then you basically say, after you do that, basically you're going to have these mega problem sets, and then you're going to have a general explanation for every one of the main concepts that you're talking about.
Yep.
And I didn't understand that one.
Yeah, this is a key question. So your mega problem set at this point has 1, 2, or 3 concrete problems for every concept you need to understand. So these are actual practice problems. So now what I recommend to do before you start studying is add some additional problems to your mega problem set. But these problems are not specific technical problems. You know, if Alice is driving towards Bob at 60 miles per hour, instead they're what I call sort of explanation or general explanation questions. And what that says is for each of the major concepts, you add a question to your mega problem set that basically says, what is this concept? What are the main ideas? What are the main steps of applying it? Why is it used? So you're adding to your mega problem set basically problems that force you to just make sure you understand the general technique, what the steps are, how it's applied. So in addition to having specific problems to help you practice that concept, you have a question for yourself about just what is this concept? What's the important
all right. So let me make sure. I'm going to do something super simple and stupid, but just to illustrate the example. So let's say that the exam was on addition. You know, so it's basically the basic concept is you're taking 2 numbers, you're adding them together. I mean, what would be like the help me understand?
Yeah. So okay. All right. So let's say for example it's let's say it's an algebra exam, for example. Okay. Arithmetic's a little too simple. So you have an algebra exam, and it's like an Algebra 2 exam or something like this. Mm-hmm. And one of the concepts you need to know, for example, might be how do you expand binomials. So you have in parentheses a plus b, and you square that. Mm-hmm. So you might have a couple sample problems from your notes or problem sets where you have specific problems. Like, okay, how do you have the binomial n plus 4 squared. Mm-hmm. What does that equal? That's a specific problem. Mm-hmm. You would add a general explanation question that says, well, what's the general rule for expanding binomials? Okay. And there you might have if you remember FOIL, first outside, inside last, you might actually have the general explanation. So it's actually, you add a question that requires you to explain the general concept. And then you have specific problems that put that concept into application. Okay. And the reason I add that general explanation question to what you're going to study is because it helps prepare you for when you get on the exam a problem that's using the technique in a way that's different than the sample problems you have.
Okay, so like let's take n plus 4 squared as like
Yeah.
the example, and you'd say the FOIL method and like first, outer, inner, last. And then what would you say, what would be the exact examples that like, I didn't, like this is the same question asked in a different way. What would be an example of that in that the example you just gave?
Yeah, well, maybe squaring binomials is so specific that
Yeah,
it's
no,
hard to
yeah.
think of. But so in that case, maybe you'll see. I guess in this case, you might see, for example, okay. So let's say your two sample problems for this were just two binomials that you had to square,
Right.
n plus 4 and whatever,
Yeah,
something else,
squared, yeah.
2n plus 3 squared or something. But then you get a problem that requires, you might on the exam get a problem that requires you to go backwards. You sort of see an equation, like
Yeah.
you see
What's a binomial that this
n squared
represents?
plus 4n plus,
Yeah,
plus whatever, and it's asking you like, I haven't done a sample problem like that. But if you've remembered, this is the rule you applied, and you do FOIL and this and that, then you're better equipped to handle that. You've given yourself insurance that for your sample problems, you didn't just accidentally memorize.
Yeah.
Oh, for n plus 4, I just know the answer is n squared plus 8n plus 16. You didn't just memorize it; that you actually remembered what process.
Yes, yeah, and you go, okay, because I'm constructing and deconstructing it. So if they give me the n squared plus 8n plus 16, I can go, n plus 4 squared. Boom.
Yeah,
So
and for something like that example, it's a pretty straightforward thing you're doing. But when you get the more complex things, let's say you're calculating derivatives in calculus, for example, that's a place where it's sort of a classic trap where you kind of are just memorizing some steps for particular examples, and you're losing, for example, the bigger picture idea of the chain rule or how you actually are applying this. And so like calculus is one of these places where people get nailed because they memorized these sample problems, but they really didn't have a great understanding of the general technique. And that's like when you're doing derivatives, there's so much flexibility in the problems you get asked.
Okay, got it.
Yeah. Now, all this is important because the next step of the mega problem set approach is that you actually have to go through and test yourself on all these questions and see, can I answer these questions or not successfully? And so if you have these technical explanation questions on there, when you then go through your problem set and test yourself on all the questions, you end up testing yourself on, do I understand the general concept in addition to, do I know how to solve these?
I get it. Okay, so because you've written on a separate piece of paper 3 sample sets, now you're like, have to go and do those answers.
Have to do them. And this is the key point. You have to answer the questions from scratch without looking at the solutions.
Right.
And you have to narrate like you're teaching a class. In other words, you have to keep holding yourself to the fire to make sure that you understand what you're doing and you're not just memorizing steps. So I suggest that you actually go to a whiteboard in a study room or write out the answer on a white piece of paper like it's a chalkboard and talk out what you're doing.
Right.
Okay, so now we go from here to here. How do we get from this step to this step? Well, this was we were multiplying the first terms in both binomials. You're narrating out loud as if you're lecturing a class. That technique is called active recall, and I can tell you, when you talk to straight A students, this is the most common thread they have. Mm-hmm. They're never, ever going to just quietly read material to themselves in hopes it sticks. Right. They're always out there trying to solve problems or present the material from scratch without looking at the notes, narrating as if they're teaching a class, because that's the only way to really test, do I actually understand this
concept, right?
Yeah, and it also incredibly strongly cements the concepts in your brain. If you do active recall, if you solve one of these problems on the chalkboard without looking at your notes and narrate it, it's stuck. You're not going to forget it. Right. Where you could read that same solution 10 times to yourself. Right. And get to the exam and not really remember what happened.
Right, so it's a combination of that, like the writing it down, I think it's like, it's the narrating, which is like acoustically hearing it, and then it's like seeing it and writing it with your hand, feeling it. It's like all those kind of, you have this 5 sensory way to just boom. And I like the idea of writing those problem sets, because then, and what you say is after you do those problem sets, you go back and say, well, you go to look in the answers and say, what did I miss? And then you're like, well, yeah, I missed a bunch in this particular area. I'm going to have to go back and read the notes and, read through more specifically what I missed about this. Maybe read the subject matter, talk to your professor, all those kind of things that you talk to your friends after.
And more importantly, you don't waste time on what you know. So my method is always, you go through once, you see which ones you got wrong, And then when you come back to studying, you only focus on what you got wrong. And then once you've gone through those again, which ones did you still get wrong? The next time around, you're only focusing on those. So you're narrowing your attention every time to keep focusing on what you don't understand. And once you've solved every problem in that mega problem set from scratch without looking at your notes while narrating what you're doing, consider yourself studied. You can stop. You're ready to take the test.
Right. And which is so different than how most people take, so what's so clear about this method to me is it's all in preparation. The notes have to be really clearly articulated, enough for you to create the problem sets. The problem sets have to be constructed in, a certain number of days in advance so that you could actually methodically go through these supersets. Each day you have to plan on going through these supersets so that you know what you don't know, so that by the 2 or 3 days before the exam, you know what you need to focus on. So it's I assume that instead of spending 8 hours in the library studying for your calculus tests, you can spend maybe 6 hours perhaps over the course of a whole week.
Exactly. Yeah, these type of really high-scoring straight A students rarely ever pull all-nighters, and that's because they never approach a test just saying, I got to just work a lot to prepare. It's always way more specific, and they get to the day before the test and they're like, hey, I've done every problem on Mega Problem Set. I trust that I understand this. Right. So, I'm going to go to the toga party. This is why it's a relaxed group of people. They don't martyr themselves. They have clear definitions of when they're done. Yeah.
Exactly. I love that you went to Dartmouth. I went to Duke, which are 2 big party schools. So it's like, of course, you want to have time for the toga party. What's the purpose of college? If you're
why
not
did you come here? Yeah,
why did you come there anyways?
Yeah.
Okay, so...
It means so much to me that you're listening to the show, and would love your support in any way by giving me comments below, or to subscribe to the show, or share the show with friends. Thank you again for your support. Love and blessings.